I'm Adam Pasquarella, and welcome to episode 20 of The Power of Bold.
From New York City, it's The Power of Bold, the podcast on risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and bold living. Join us as we interview world-class performers, analyze life-changing books, and gather actionable insights to help you achieve your goals. Here's your host, Adam Pasquarella.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the podcast. We've got a real treat for you today. My guest for this episode is Annie Duke. For those of you that watched poker on ESPN in the 2000s, you may remember her name. Annie is a former professional poker player who won over $4 million in tournaments throughout her career, making her one of the top earning female professional poker players of all time. She has also won a World Series of Poker bracelet, an extremely prestigious prize, and is the only woman to have won the World Series of Poker Tournament of Champions and the NBC National Heads Up Poker Championship. Annie retired from poker in 2012 and is now a speaker and consultant on decision strategy. Simply put, Annie was a legend in poker and is an expert on decision making. Poker players may make up to 20 decisions per hand, and Annie spent about 20 years playing poker. She's a pro's pro with this stuff. Consequently, she released a book on decision-making which is called Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts. Even if you aren't familiar with poker or couldn't care less, Annie's book has some really important tips on how we can all become more rational, objective decision-makers, from deciding to quit our job and try something new, to deciding what to order at a new restaurant. In our interview, we touch on a number of topics, including how poker influenced Annie's views on decision-making, the problem of resulting, where we equate the quality of a decision with the quality of its outcome, how thinking in bets allows us to more objectively evaluate decisions, and the steps we can take today to start making more rational, objective decisions. One more thing. Before we start, I just want to apologize for some of the shaky audio during the interview. Our Skype connection was somewhat spotty, and even after we've tried to clean up the audio, you may hear some gaps or delays. So if you feel like you missed something during the interview, you can head over to thepowerofbold.com and find the transcript for this episode. Okay, without further ado, here's my discussion with Annie. My guest for this episode is Annie Duke, one of the leading female money winners in the history of professional poker, and a current corporate speaker and consultant on decision strategy. Annie, who retired from poker in 2012, has devoted her life to studying decision-making under pressure, and she just released a book on decision-making called Thinking in Bets, Making Smarter Decisions When You Don't Have All the Facts. Annie, many thanks for appearing on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Your book is an excellent primer on ways that we can improve our decision-making. And we're going to go over some of the strategies that you offer to help us become better decision makers. But before all of that, I'd like to ask about why you decided to write the book in the first place. So just to start off, when did you first become interested in how humans make decisions?
Oh gosh. Really, actually, in college, I got a job as a research assistant with a professor at Columbia where I went to undergrad, named Barbara Landau. And she was studying first language acquisition, which is related to this issue of how do you learn under conditions of uncertainty. And so I was her research assistant for 4 years. And then she encouraged me to go on to graduate school, which I did. And I actually went to Penn to study with Lila and Henry Gleitman, who had been her advisors when she was in graduate school. So I was really in the cognitive science program there and was studying, all sorts of things about the way that we process information. My specialty was still in first language acquisition, but there's actually a lot of similarities to what the problem is that you're presented as a child trying to learn your first language, and actually what the problem is you're presented with as a poker player trying to learn how to play. And so I actually went all the way through graduate school, all the way to going out for professorships. But I got sick right at the end, and I needed to take some time off. And it was during that time off that I started playing poker, right around 92. And in 94, I declared myself a pro. And then from 94, when I declared myself professional, all the way to 2012 would be when my poker career was happening. But 10 years before I retired in 2012, in 2002, I started actually giving talks, keynotes, corporate retreats, executive coaching, consulting, and decision making, particularly under conditions of uncertainty, and thinking about risk and probabilities and scenario planning and strategy. So I overlap the two careers. It's just that the poker career was very public facing, and the consulting career was, they don't show that on television. So.
Right, exactly. When you're sitting at the poker table early in your career, that wasn't the first time you were thinking about developing a system to make better decisions. You'd been thinking about this for some time. And was there a particular moment where it really stuck out to you when you were at the poker table, or was this something that was just ongoing?
So I think that there was initially a little bit of a conundrum for me when I first started playing, that I think that I felt very implicitly that there was this clash happening between kind of this thing that everybody learns in their first introduction to psychology class and how people behaved at an actual table. So in Intro to Psych, every Psych 1 class, one of the things that people learn is this idea that learning occurs under condition where there's lots and lots of feedback tied closely in time to decisions and actions. So you can think about how that might apply to, sort of the classic rat running a maze. It runs the maze, it gets to the end of the maze, it gets a reward, a pellet, and then it learns to run the maze faster. And so it's getting feedback for its actions, that something is tied to the action of learning this maze. And so that's sort of what you're taught, and you're taught this kind of applied beings. This is an incredibly feedback-rich environment. You're getting outcomes within seconds of the decisions that you're making. You win or lose the hand, there's an exchange of chips, and this is happening over and over and over again in a very compressed time frame. And what I saw was that while there's some pretty steep learning right kind of at the beginning, which has to do with figuring out basic concepts like, I can win without the best hand, so I could bluff, that there's a lot of plateauing that occurs after that. So you have this kind of initially steep learning curve, and then it just sort of flattens out. And that was really super confusing to me, how people could be making the same mistakes over and over again for 10 years, despite the fact that there was lots and lots of feedback that maybe those strategies weren't so great. So I kind of implicitly understood, like, there's something really interesting going on here. And then in 2002, when I got asked to give my first talk, was when I really started explicitly trying to put that into, words that I could express to other human beings.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's interesting. I follow David Einhorn, the investor. He's actually a poker player too, and he says that investing in poker is pretty similar, except for poker, you receive the outcome right away, where investing, you have to wait potentially years to see if you're right or not. But even receiving that outcome right away isn't the whole picture, as you describe in your book, because you could have won because of luck. You don't exactly know what happened except the outcome. So like, you've lived in both worlds with, the poker world and outside the poker world. Getting that feedback, how do you deal with deciding whether some event is luck or whether it's skill? Like how do you get into that?
So now you've gotten down into the core of the problem. So so here's really the issue that is really so revealed in poker. That's the issue that we have in any area of life. Investing, business decisions, any kind of life decisions, choosing a partner, even what happens when you follow or don't follow the rules of the road. I mean, you can get down into really most life decisions fall into this category, which is that there's lots and lots of uncertainty. And the uncertainty comes from two places. The first place is that there's hidden information. So the cards are face down. So you're making these decisions without knowing what your opponent's actual cards are, which makes it very hard for you to calculate out what the best choice is or even what the worst choice is, because I can't see what you have. And to make that problem even worse, and this is where I think that it's sort of an illusion that there's a big difference between poker because it takes a while to get the outcome versus investing because it takes a long time, is that most hands of poker end up with the cards never being revealed. And without the cards ever being revealed, it's very unclear what the worst or best choice might have been. Sort of all you know is you won or lost the hand. And so that's not that different between you make some sort of investment, say in a stock, and the stock is sort of ticking up and down, minute by minute. But, so that is sort of similar to an outcome that you might be getting in poker, is that you do have these fluctuations that are happening, which is really what those chip exchanges are. But you're not getting a fully formed outcome in the sense that I mostly don't get to see your cards to know, did I have the best hand? Did I have the worst hand? What might have been the best choices, in the sense that you might have that information, for example, in every game of chess that you play. Because right. I can see your pieces and I can see where you moved them and what all the possible moves were. So that's the first source of uncertainty that's really difficult to deal with, is this hidden information problem. And then the second source of uncertainty, which really mucks things up, is this luck issue. So, the problem is that even if you took away all of the hidden information, you can still win with the worst hand and lose with the best hand. You can think about a game like backgammon as being, it's like poker without the hidden information, right? I can see where all of your checkers are in backgammon. But so I can sort of calculate out if I have a superior position to you at any given time, but you have to roll the dice. So even if I have a superior position to you right now, and even if I play my position perfectly, I can still lose to you because the dice don't go my way. So where this causes a problem is that all we have to see is the outcome. I won or lost the hand. And how do we derive then, if we know that luck could be the main force, it could be the main force, whether that outcome was due to luck or skill? Did I play right and I just got unlucky, or did I play poorly and I sort of got what I deserved? So, it feels a little amorphous when we talk about poker, but I think where we can see this really clearly is if we think about something super simple, like going through a traffic light. So I don't know, I don't know about you, so I'll just add, have you ever run a red light in your life?
Definitely.
Definitely, right. I bet, actually, because I've done this, I bet that there have been times when you might have done it on purpose, like it's 2 a.m. and there's literally no one around, and it's taking forever for the light to change, and there's no traffic. So maybe you've done that on purpose. I did that. I don't do that anymore, but when I was younger, maybe I did that. So you've run red lights. Have you ever gotten in an accident because of it?
Not yet, knock on wood.
Not yet, right? Interesting.
Yeah. So
that's a good outcome, but can we agree that it's not a good decision to run a red light?
Yeah, of course.
Right. So, and I personally, I don't know about you, but I've actually run a red light and got a green light rather. I've been following the rules of the road and I've run a green light and gotten into an accident before. So, and yet I don't go back and say, going through green lights, that's such a terrible idea. So this is where we can see, in this very simple example, which is very, very skill driven, what the influence of luck is. And so if all that I tell you, if you don't have access to whether the light was green or red, right, that sort of would be the hidden information piece. If all I tell you is I got through the traffic light safely, how do you know whether I made a good decision or not going through the intersection?
Right.
If all I tell you is I got in an accident, how do you know when you can't see the light and you can't see whether I was following the rules of the road? And that's kind of the problem of most of the decisions that we're making in our lives.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And somewhat related to this is your idea of resulting. And I found this discussion really interesting in the book because I think it's such a common phenomenon that people have. yet we kind of ignore its effects. And so for those of you that don't know, it's essentially this idea that we have this tendency to equate the quality of a decision with the quality of its outcome. And so little hindsight bias is at play, and people, again, don't calculate the impact of luck. And in the book, the example I really like is when you talk about the New England Patriots Seahawks Super Bowl decision.
Yeah.
At the end, when Pete Carroll decided to pass the ball instead of handing it off to Marshawn Lynch, and everyone said, "Oh, that was such a bad decision," even though the odds may have said that it would have actually been a good decision. They were just unlucky for deciding that. And so why do you think people tend to ignore this idea of resulting?
So hindsight bias and resulting are kind of twins, like they're related to each other, but slightly different. So let's call them fraternal twin biases. Hindsight bias is this kind of idea that once an outcome happens, that no other outcome was possible. So anytime that you make a decision, there's a set of possible outcomes that could occur. And what kind of happens with hindsight bias is that it feels like that was the only outcome that could have happened, the one that actually did happen. And so therefore you should have known that outcome was going to happen. And then resulting is that the quality of the outcome that occurred tells you what the quality of the decision is. So in the Pete Carroll case, we could say that the hindsight bias would be, well, of course the ball got intercepted. Who didn't know that was going to happen, right? And it doesn't matter that it was a very low probability. That was the outcome that could occur. So that would be hindsight bias. Resulting is, of course, it was a bad decision because the outcome was bad. So we know it must be a bad decision because it turned out so poorly. And that's actually exactly what happened in that case was, so Pete Carroll is on the 1 yard line of the New England Patriots. They're down by 4. It's second down. They have one timeout, and there's 26 seconds left in the game. So he decides to call a pass play. So Russell Wilson passes the ball instead of handing the ball off to Marshawn Lynch, who of course is an amazing running back. Mm-hmm. Malcolm Butler intercepts the ball in the end zone. Game over. And, you can hear during the game, Chris Collingsworth calling that and just talking about, oh my God, how could he have made that call? It was so horrible. And then the next day, in general, the newspapers agreed. It was kind of an argument among pundits about whether it was the worst call in Super Bowl history or the worst call in NFL history. And there wasn't really, there weren't very many people saying, well, hold on a second, like maybe we should actually look at what the statistics, like what were the probabilities there involved in that decision, as opposed to just looking at the fact that it turned out spectacularly badly. So there were a couple of people, I think it was Brian Butler on Slate and then Benjamin Morris on 538. Both argued that it was actually quite a sound play. We don't need to get into the details of why, but the simplest thing that I can say to you is that the chances of an interception there were very small. Mm-hmm. In the 2000 in that season, this was the 2015 Super Bowl, the interceptions rate in that particular situation, short yardage into the end zone, was actually 0. And then the last 15 years of the NFL, it was around between 1% and 2%. So it was a really, really, really unlikely outcome. The most likely outcome was either the ball is dropped, at which point the clock stops and they can run these two running plays anyway. They can hand it off to Marshawn Lynch regardless. Or the ball is caught, assuming for the game-winning touchdown. So what happened there was that everybody was so caught up in the spectacularly poor quality of this outcome that they just all said, oh, this decision must have been awful. And to see how much of a shadow an outcome casts on your ability to see through to the decision quality in any kind of clear-eyed way, like how much of a gravity well it is. Mm-hmm. Just imagine this, and I'll ask you to imagine it. What do you think would have happened in terms of the headlines and in terms of Chris Collingsworth call during the game? Had the ball that was thrown been caught for the game-winning touchdown?
Yeah, I mean, Pete Carroll would have been thought of being a genius, because Marshawn Lynch is this power running back, and I think he was doing pretty well that game. Mm-hmm. But they probably would have said, oh, that was such an unconventional call. He must have saw something that Bill Belichick or other people didn't see.
Right. Like he, this is what got him to the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
What a bold call. Genius. He out Belichick.
Exactly.
And I think that we can feel that pretty strongly. And in fact, there's a really good example that's evidence of that. In the Super Bowl this year, the Philly Special, which was an incredibly unexpected play.
Right.
Everybody expected the Eagles to just go for the field goal. It was 4th and 1 to end the second quarter. Everybody expected them to go for the field goal. They were up by 3 and just go up by 6. And instead, Doug Peterson calls this Philly Special, and Nick Foles is all of a sudden in the end zone, catching the ball for a touchdown. And you can see, Chris Collingsworth is calling that as a genius play, like, ooh, the Maverick coach. And the next day, everybody's like, oh, that was so crazy. That was really out Belichicking Belichick. So here we have these, 2 plays where I think that you can see that the outcome is really distorting the way that we think about the decision. And in fact, if people want to get kind of a kick, there's actually a review of my book, Thinking in Bets, on my Amazon page, which is just a review of my saying, maybe that play wasn't so bad. And the person just saying, no, it was horrible, and really going through all the reasons why it was so awful, which was mainly that you should have known that it didn't work out. It's actually, it's kind of a pretty funny review if you've read the book. And I think that it's actually a really interesting example of how powerful it is. Because, of course, I as you know, I don't say in the book, oh, it was a genius play. I just say, I think it's pretty hard to argue it was the worst play in Super Bowl history. And we should think about the other side and how much of a shadow the result might be casting.
Exactly. And I guess just going beyond sports, in our day-to-day lives, I mean, we all deal with this phenomenon to one extent or the other. But do you see resulting being more prevalent in certain situations, maybe higher stakes situations, compared to day-to-day situations we see in our lives?
You know what? I think that it happens in just even the smallest of situations. You're looking at the menu and you're trying to decide what to order. And I mean, this is a very small stakes situation, right?
Yeah.
And you decide on an order, you get your food, it's terrible. And what do you think immediately? I should have ordered the other thing.
Exactly.
Right? Oh, that was such a bad decision to order this. Well, how could it be a bad decision? You didn't know it was going to come out poorly. And you'll do this even in situations where you have experience at the restaurant and the food has actually been good in the past. And you order and you're still like, oh, what a bad decision. Why did I order this? That's as low stakes as it can get. It's just your lunch.
Right.
Right. So, I think that this happens all the time. It happens certainly in HR decisions, right? When we hire someone and they turn out to maybe not work out or they quit after 6 months or whatever. What a terrible decision to hire that person. Well, maybe not. Maybe you had available candidates, and of the available candidates, that person had the highest likelihood of being a good hire. But the fact is that, of course, there's uncertainty, and of course, there's hidden information there. You're looking at the person's CV. You're trying to do the best that you can with the interview process, but you don't get to have them come work in your office for 6 months before you decide to hire them on, unless you happen to be hiring on an intern. Mm-hmm. And even then, you only have you just have more information in terms of predicting how they'll turn out as a hire in the future. It's still not definite. It gets closer. But when you've got 4 candidates coming in, you're looking at their CVs and you're checking their references and you're doing the interview. It's probabilistic how it's going to turn out. It's certainly not certain. And maybe you're choosing the person who has the highest probability of working out among all of the people that you have to choose from. But maybe the highest probability is, I think it's 60%. Well, that means that 40% of the time, maybe that hire isn't going to work out. That doesn't mean you made a bad decision.
Yeah.
It means that you chose the highest probability to work out. I think that I think a really good example of this problem actually comes from the 2016 presidential election. Mm-hmm. When you looked at Nate Silver, sort of where Nate Silver kind of landed, in the last week leading up to the election, he had Clinton about 65% to win and Trump about 35% to win. So when Trump won, what did people say? Well, Nate Silver was wrong.
Mm-hmm. Now, the pollsters got it wrong. Yeah.
Right. But no, Nate Silver said it was 35%.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that he was wrong. It means that he was assigning probabilities to a single election, and that we can't really say a lot about whether his algorithm is wrong unless we look across all of the elections that he's predicted. We just don't have enough data based on one time when 30%, 35% happens a lot. I mean, to give you an idea of how much 35% happens, it's about Monday, Tuesday, and half of Wednesday during a week. So unless you're like incredibly surprised that Monday and Tuesday sort of roll around every week, you probably shouldn't have been that surprised that, Trump won. It would be like, it's Monday, It's Monday. I'm wrong. It like literally doesn't make sense off the one time. And I think that that's what resulting causes us to do, is to think that the one time matters so much for determining decision quality. And it really doesn't say very much about it when these things are so loosely linked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it seems like people, if you give odds of 60, 40, 70, 30, they think the 40 or 30 is zero.
Yep.
And they're shocked when the 30% actually happens, even though it's 30% 3 times out of 10.
Right. So I guess one of the more brutal ways that I put it to people is, you think 30% is zero? Okay, I have a gun with 10 chambers in it, and I'm going to fill 3 of them with bullets.
Yeah, right. Right.
Do you want to play?
Yeah.
Of course people are like, what? No.
Yeah, exactly.
No way. And it's like, well, okay, but you have to understand, like, that's 30%. So, Pete Carroll, this is the Pete Carroll problem, right? Like, Pete Carroll had a gun with 100 chambers and like 2 of them were filled.
Yeah.
And it, and he spun the chambers and, the bullet came out of the gun. I mean, that's what we need to remember. It's very hard. And this is the big problem, is that, I think that we talk about being results oriented as kind of a good thing in life. And in fact, it's kind of a bad thing to be results oriented, because what it does is it means that you're looking at the quality of the outcome. Mm-hmm. And you're saying, this is what tells me. This is what tells me whether decisions were good. And the fact is that for most of the decisions you make in life, it doesn't tell you very much, because you can't collect enough data to say one way or the other. It's like you don't have 10,000 coin flips at most things. You have a couple. Yeah. And if I flip a coin twice, it doesn't tell me very much about the coin. Exactly.
And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like one of the antidotes or a way to cure this resulting problem is by thinking in bets. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. So let me explain kind of what I mean by thinking in bets. So one of the things that we want to kind of do is dig down into how confident are we about how much of this result has to do with decision quality versus how much of this result has to do with luck. And one of the ways to do that is to actually think about it as if you had to bet on it, as if you had to bet on your decision about it. And you can do this in terms of thinking about betting on a belief that you have, like, here's something that people, pundits have been saying for next November is, Democrats are going to take the House, or the Democrats are going to take the Senate. So that would be an example of like a prediction that you might make. There are beliefs which would be, say that climate change is caused by humans. That would be a belief you might have, for example. That attachment parenting is the best way to parent. That's a belief that you might have. So when we think about this, we can imagine that if we were to frame those things as bets, that we might bring to the surface a little bit more what our own uncertainty is. So like the example that I give in the book, and it's a super simple one, is if you say Citizen Kane won Best Picture. And obviously I've just said that with certainty there, right? I've said that that's just true, right? So marked as true. Citizen Kane won Best Picture. If you said to me, well, do you want to bet on it? What's going to happen to the person who's challenged to a bet there? They're going to take Google out.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, oh, wait a minute. Let me think, because maybe I'm not 100% sure of that. Maybe I just kind of said that as if I were sure.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm not. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if just not to make it a little more tangible for the listeners as well. So like we have a lot of younger listeners who are professionals, and some are perhaps like seeking to become entrepreneurs. So say like one of our listeners wants to start their own business, and they have an idea, business plan, what have you, and they're thinking of making the leap. And so in that case, you have to evaluate it as if you're placing a bet on a certain future, right? And then you have to evaluate the opportunity costs and go from there. Like what would you recommend for people that are thinking of doing something like that?
Well, so I recommend essentially a set of tools that really allows you to embrace uncertainty. Because when you embrace uncertainty, I think that you have a much better probability of success, because what happens is that results don't end up kind of yanking you around, because you're much more prepared for the types of futures that could occur, and you're much more likely to have action plans in place to deal with different twists and turns. And particularly if you want to make the leap into entrepreneurship, you better be prepared for the uncertainty. And if you're not prepared for the uncertainty, you're going to have a much higher chance that it's not going to work out. So you start with saying, okay, if I make a particular decision, if I decide that I'm going to do this and I'm going to execute a particular strategy, let me try to imagine what the different scenarios are that could occur. So this is your first step in doing it, right? So, what are the ways that this could work out? So we can think about it like, for example, like here's a super simple thing. Like, okay, if I go through this green light, what are the ways this could turn out? Right? Well, I could get in an accident. I could get through just fine. I could get a ticket, because we know that sometimes people, like the police, can stop when it doesn't have any, when you actually were following the rules of the road, just as an example. So those would be three simple scenarios that could occur from my driving through a green light. If I start the business versus I don't start the business, right? And you can sort of figure out the scenarios if say in your career as a lawyer, how do we think that might turn out? What do I think the returns are? Not just in terms of money, but my own happiness, my own sense of fulfillment, the things that I value. And then ask yourself how much risk you're willing to tolerate. How much risk you should 5 is going to be really different than how much risk you should be willing to tolerate when you're 60, as an example, right? So because when you're 25, you can recover a lot better if things don't work out. You've got a lot more time to sort of, build yourself back up and collect enough money until you pass go, right? Which would be, say, retirement. If you're 60, you're probably going to be a little bit more risk averse in your decisions, right? So you're sort of deciding how much risk am I willing to take on, and then think about, given what your values are, what kind of things make you happy, what kind of things make you fulfilled, how much security you feel like you need in your life, that kind of thing. You can say, yes, I want to make the leap, or not. And if you do decide to make the leap, obviously there's different types of leaps you can make, and different kind of strategies that you can implement, and try to think about what the scenarios are, good and bad, that can result from those. And then once you've got the scenarios figured out, take a stab at the probability of those things occurring. So, and I think that that's what's really important, right? Is to say, well, okay, so I'm going to make this leap into entrepreneurship, and here are the different ways it can work out. And it may actually be that failure might be the most likely scenario, but you've decided that you can tolerate that because the payoff for success is enough. So it's not just that you're trying to figure out the probability that the scenario that has the highest probability of success. It's that you're trying to figure out the scenario that, given the payoff to you, is worthwhile. So you may end up saying, well, okay, the failure scenario is 80%, the success scenario is 20%. But the payoff on the success scenario is so high to me that I'm willing to do that. So make sure that you have that with open eyes, because then if it doesn't work out, you're less likely to self-recriminate. You're less likely to feel like you should never have made the decision in the first place, or the decision was really bad to try, because you've laid all that out in the first place and you've memorialized it in some way so that you recognize, well, this was always in the tree, right? Like this was one of the ways that things could turn out. So that's kind of number one. And then number two that I think is really important that we don't do enough of is, don't just think about all the wonderful ways that, you're going to become a, multi-billionaire entrepreneur, but think about it. It's 5 years from now and this hasn't worked out. Why did that happen? So that's what we call the pre-mortem. So so most people do what's called a backcast. It's 5 years from now, I'm fabulously successful, and I'm on the cover of Inc. right? And how did I get there? And that's sort of the world that we like to live in, is this very positive fantasizing, because we sort of think like we don't want to be a naysayer, we don't want to be sort of like a dark cloud, and we want to be our own best cheerleaders. And that's awesome, except that reveals a different path to success, interestingly, than thinking about it's 5 years from now and I failed. Because when you think about it's 5 years from now and I failed, how did I get here? What happens is that you really end up stress testing the plan in a way that's actually much more effective, where you can kind of see the points in the road where things could go wrong. And number one, you're much more likely to anticipate those coming, so that they end up not being a big surprise to you. And it means that you're going to be more nimble, because you're going to be less reactive to those things happening, because you're going to say, okay, I recognize that there might be these things that might occur. Number one, okay, that's fine. I know that might happen. And number two, let me try to think about how I could reduce the probability of those things occurring, because now I've recognized that those might be in my path ahead. And I'm going to reduce the probability of those occurring, but it doesn't mean that I can get it to zero. So let me think about what I'm going to do in case they do occur, so that you already have an action plan in place. And so it's interesting, because I think that living in that sort of more negative side of things actually increases the probability of success. It doesn't decrease it.
Yeah, I think in your book you say there was a study where people that engaged in this pre-mortem activity actually achieved more success than the people doing the opposite, envisioning all positive future and everything like that. And I think it's interesting too, because throughout the book, you're trying to become a more rational, objective thinker. But at least with the pre-mortem, you're using those negative emotions to your advantage. Would you argue that? Just
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree with you completely. I think that there's been a lot of stuff about, positive thinking. And what I would say is that I like to think more about positive goals as opposed to positive thinking. So, of course, you want to have a positive goal that you're moving toward. But if you spend all your time thinking positively about that positive goal, you're going to miss a lot of ways in which there might be stress in your plan, right? In which your business might be stressed or your decisions might be stressed. So there's two places that I really recommend that people go look in terms of looking at why, sort of thinking about these paths of failure might be really helpful to getting you towards success. One would be look at Gary Klein. He wrote a great piece for Harvard Business Review. And in general, his work is pretty interesting. He's somebody who really talks about sort of what the role of instinct is in decision making. So I think he's kind of an interesting guy to read as a contrast to, say, Kahneman and Tversky, which think more about bias. That's more the world that I think in. But I think he wrote a very nice piece about the power of a premortem and how much it improves your decision making. To do that, because it develops a more clear picture of how the future might unfold. And the better our picture of how the future might unfold, the better our decisions around it, right? So that's really where the premortem comes in. And then Gabrielle Oettingen wrote a book called Rethinking Positive Thinking, which I really highly recommend as well, which really talks about this idea of what does thinking about where things might go wrong, how does that help you? Like here's where I'll give you a very simple example. Let's say that you have a weight loss goal. I want to lose 20 pounds in 6 months. And I say to you, okay, it's 6 months from now and you lost the 20 pounds. What are all the things that happened? What you're likely to say is like, well, I went to the gym and I ate really healthy and I stuck to my diet. And that's sort of where your mind is going to go. It's going to be about like gym going and going to the gym 5 times a week and making sure that I didn't eat the bread at the restaurant. And things like that. When I say to you, okay, it's 6 months from now and you failed to reach your goal, you didn't lose any weight. How did that happen? Now what's going to reveal is all the things that are going to be stressed, right? Like I was too busy and, the first thing to go was the gym, or every time I went into the break room, there were donuts, or a bunch of friends asked me to go out. And it was sort of like this once a week thing, and there was alcohol involved. And as soon as I start drinking, the chips and French fries start going down my mouth, and you start thinking about all of those ways in which you might fail. And notice what that does for you is it allows you to anticipate, okay, if I know that one of the big places that I'm going to fail is that the first thing to go in a busy schedule is going to be the gym, how do I create a contract for myself to make sure that that's protected? If I know that I'm going to have a problem because the break room always has donuts in it, what can I do in order to make it so that I'm less likely to eat the donut? And then you can also do things like imagine, well, let's say that I do eat the donut. What's my plan? Right? Because then what happens is you say, okay, if I eat the donut, it's okay. That just means like, okay, I messed up in that minute, but I'm going to make sure that I don't mess up the rest of my day, which is what tends to happen if you haven't planned for that. You feel so bad about yourself that you failed because you've slipped that you end up just giving up on the whole day or the whole week, and you say, I'll start again on Monday. If you've anticipated that in advance and you have a plan for it and you've written down what your plan is in case you slip, you're less likely to end up having these sort of cascading effects. So you can see just with something as simple as like a weight loss goal, how imagining it's 6 months from now and I didn't reach there sort of reveals all of these places where you can actually shore up the plan in a way that's much more likely to get you to success.
Exactly, and you're planning for the worst and hoping for the best, and at least
that's exactly right.
You have a plan if things don't go as well as you imagine.
Right.
Well, just to wrap up here, in the book you say that we're living in the matrix, so to speak, and that our brains make the world more comfortable, and that our beliefs we see them as nearly always correct, and we always see favorable outcomes as a result of our skill and not luck. And so for our listeners that want to break out of this mindset today, what can they do, like starting today? Is there something small that can get them going on that front?
Yeah, there absolutely is. So I'm going to give you the bad news first, and then I'll give you the good news.
Okay.
The bad news is that there's not a whole lot you can do on your own. Meaning, if you just say, well, I'm a pretty smart person, I'm pretty good at information processing, and now I know, right? I know that uncertainty is really hard to deal with, and I'm really likely to take credit for good stuff and, sort of offload responsibility for bad stuff that happens. And now you've told me about resulting, and you just say, well, now I'm not going to do that anymore because you've told me about it. The answer is that's not going to help you very much. So this is just kind of the way that our brains work. There's so much uncertainty in why outcomes occur the way that they do that we just have a lot of like cognitive rope to sort of hang ourselves with. So that's the bad news. But here's the good news. And this is what everybody can go out and do right now is go find 2 people to help you. So here's the thing. I am probably going to be I'm probably going to be pretty bad at spotting when I'm being biased, right? At spotting when I'm blaming something on luck that maybe was partly because of decisions that I made, or biased about taking credit for things that turned out well that maybe involve some luck, right? I'm not going to see that necessarily so clearly. I'm not going to be able to see when I'm resulting necessarily very clearly. But what's really interesting, and I think that you'll probably feel this like in your gut, is that you're really good at seeing it in other people.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like you can say, oh, come on, like that, you're so biased, right? So we're very good at seeing it in other people. So if we can get a couple of people to agree to help us with our decisions and we'll help them with theirs, we can actually get much better at this. The key is, though, that the group needs to be formed with intention.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I think that there's been a lot of talk, obviously, recently about echo chambers. And this is sort of how humans naturally tend, right? That we sort of like to hear our beliefs spewed back at us. That makes us feel pretty good.
Right.
And when we're in groups, we tend to do that. We tend to do that kind of team player, agreeable, just kind of agreeing with what the other person is saying. And that's not very helpful to our decision making. That just means that we're sort of like talking to clones of ourselves, and we know that we're not very good at it on our own. So talking to a clone of us is probably not going to be very helpful. But if you can get a couple of people to agree, look, we're here to watch each other's, decision backs. And so what that means is that, first of all, we're going to hold each other accountable to trying to become as rational as possible, right? Where our goal as a group is to try to be accurate rather than right. So what do I mean by that? Well, being right means, well, I believe something and now I just know even more so that it's true, right? So it's like, I'm liberal, and so I really like to listen to Rachel Maddow because she tells me what I already know. or, I'm really conservative. And so I really like to listen to Fox News because they tell me what I know already. So that's reasoning to be right, to just affirm the things that you already believed were true. Reasoning to be accurate is challenging your beliefs and trying to kind of stress test them. It's approaching the world by asking, why am I wrong? As opposed to why am I right? So that you can get closer to the objective truth. So if we were to form a group together, what we would be agreeing to is that when you state beliefs, that I would be poking at your beliefs and I would be saying, well, have you thought about this other way to think about it? Why do you think you might be wrong? What kind of details went into this decision that you aren't telling me that maybe are making you uncomfortable? Like, tell me all the things that would make you uncomfortable. And we're agreeing to do that, and that we're going to support each other in that. So that what happens is that the social approval is not coming from this sort of nodding and saying yes to each other. The social approval is coming from when I come to you and I say, Adam, I think I made a mistake. I think I made a poor decision.
Yeah.
Let me tell you about it, because I think I actually may have goofed here. And you say, that's amazing. Mm-hmm. That's so cool that you're saying that to me. Yes, I totally want to help you with that. And now we're supporting each other in this more kind of truth-seeking attitude. Right? So you need the accountability. You're going to hold me accountable. You need this commitment to accuracy. And then what we also need to be committed to is tolerating and being open-minded to views that disagree with us. Yes. And actually agreeing with amongst ourselves that that's what we're actually going to seek out. And the reason why it's so important to seek out views that disagree with us is because we already know why we believe what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we don't need help with that. I already know why I have the opinions I have, or I have the predictions that I have, or I think that this strategy is going to work out beautifully, or this tactic is exactly right, or this product is exactly what we need to launch, or this person is exactly who we need to hire. I already know what my reasons for that are. What's really helpful to me is when I seek out people who disagree with me. Mm-hmm. And when you do that and you form this group with this kind of charter, no longer, or hopefully you move toward this attitude that information that disagrees with you is no longer sort of like viewed as a threat to your identity, but it's viewed as a help, because it helps you to actually form more accurate beliefs about the world that then make you a better decision maker. And that means that you'll win in the long run, as opposed to in the short run. So you can think about it like, if what I'm doing is just trying to be right, I'm getting all of my kicks out of what's in the moment, how I feel in the moment, right? Like, ooh, I'm right. I knew it. I feel so good. If I'm thinking about accuracy, then I'm getting all my kicks out of being a better decision maker going forward. And as my decisions get better, my probability of success goes up and up. And so I'm winning in the long run.
Exactly. Well, those are all excellent tips, and for more, the listeners can buy Thinking in Bets. It's a terrific book, and I really enjoyed hearing about all of the tips to become a better decision maker. And so, Annie, if people want to learn more about you or the book, where can they go?
Sure. So there's a few places that you can go. One is I'm pretty active on Twitter, so you can find me at Annie Duke. I just post a lot of stuff that's either science or current events based that I think relates to this kind of thinking. You can also go to my website, annieduke.com, and there's a few things that you can do there. One is you can hire me there. Another is you can contact me. Mm-hmm. You can contact me there. And the other thing is you can sign up for my newsletter there. So there are archives of the newsletter on there. It goes out every Friday. You can see if you like the content that I put out every Friday. And if you do, please sign up for the newsletter, which is really thinking about, it's really trying to put forward like ways that you might apply the concepts that are in the book to things that are happening kind of that week in the news. So hopefully people like it and sign up for it. And then the last place that you can find me is actually at my nonprofit, which is howidecide.org. And that's a nonprofit that I co-founded to try to do a couple things. First is to create programs to teach critical thinking and decision skills, particularly to underserved youth, and to try to get that into the curriculum of what's being taught in schools. And then the second is actually just to catalyze interest around, how do we get people to be more rational in general, and make that a priority in education, which, right now, obviously, the priority is in, learning 2 + 2 is 4, which you can look up on the internet. So I'm hoping that we can create a priority about being more rational in the way that we process information.
Great. Well, we'll link to all of those in our show notes. And Annie, thank you so much again for speaking out the book. It was a great discussion.
Thank you.
And take care. So that was Annie Duke, a legend in professional poker and an expert on decision making. As you can tell, Annie is really passionate about how we can all make better decisions. If you're like her and would like to learn more about decision making, you should check out Thinking in Bets. It's a fairly quick read, and you'll come out of it with some great ideas on how you can make better decisions in your everyday life. That's it for this episode. Once again, thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Power of Bold. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Bold. For show notes and a transcript of this episode, visit thepowerofbold.com. Feel free to get in touch by visiting our Facebook and Twitter pages. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play. We'll see you next time.